Hi, I'm Allison. I'm a reading specialist and I help parents whose kids are struggling with reading. In this video, I'm going to go in depth and teach you lots of stuff about how to teach your dyslexic child to read when you are homeschooling. Before we dive in, if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, make sure to do that now and then also hit the little bell so that you don't miss out on any of the new videos I post about helping your child learn to read. Before we dive in, I actually have a question for you. I would love it if you would share if you are homeschooling a child with dyslexia. Just say me in the comments, and then if you don't mind sharing why you decided to homeschool, I would also love to know that information as well, because I know families have different reasons for choosing to homeschool. Okay, so this is a big topic for sure. We're going to break it down into 3 main areas, and I'll just number here so that you know which area we're talking about. Our first area that we're going to focus on is just things to know about dyslexia that will be really helpful to you. Our second area is skills to teach. So when you're teaching your child to read as a homeschooling parent, like what skills are you going to have to work on? And then our third area is tips and strategies for motivating your child and just making this whole process easier. Sometimes if a kiddo has dyslexia or another like reading difficulty, they don't want to read and it can become like a power struggle. So we're going to talk about how to avoid that and what you can do to support them. All right, so let's begin by talking about what dyslexia is and just things that you should know when you're going to be homeschooling a child that has dyslexia or you suspect has dyslexia. So first of all, dyslexia is an unexpected difficulty in learning to read, okay? You may notice that your child really struggled or is struggling to learn the alphabet, the letter sounds, that, once they get to decoding 3-letter words, that's hard for them. Spelling words, even really simple words, challenging, right? So that can be a sign that your child has dyslexia. Now, if your child is reversing numbers and letters, meaning they're like, for example, they're writing the number 3, I wrote it correctly. If they're writing the number 3 backwards, or they are writing letters backwards, this does not necessarily mean that they have dyslexia. These reversals are actually very common in young children. Now, do some kids with dyslexia struggle with number and letter reversals? Yes, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they have dyslexia. So if you want to talk about your child reversing numbers and letters, just say that instead. Say, okay, they're reversing numbers and letters or writing them backward. We don't necessarily want to say that they have dyslexia because just from this, we don't know that. Okay, now if your child does have dyslexia, then that actually means that there are differences in their brain when compared to the brain of a typical reader. And so it's actually happening on like a neurological level. Dyslexia does not, however, have anything to do with intelligence. People that have dyslexia are often very smart, very capable. It's just that their brain really struggles to match the letters and the sounds that they make. That's just really hard for people. Another thing to know about dyslexia is that kids can't outgrow it. It's something that you always have. However, dyslexic people can usually be successful in learning to read, have normal lives. They just have to have the right supports in place. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about in this video, is how you can put those supports in place to help your dyslexic child. Now, another thing to know is that your child is probably going to need more time in practice to master certain skills when compared to an average reader. Their brain just requires more reinforcement and more practice time. And so since you're homeschooling, this is actually a really great opportunity to give them more practice time because you can, spread it out throughout the day. You can take breaks and you just have more wiggle room than like a normal classroom teacher would. Now, even if you're not homeschooling and you're just providing your child with extra help, that's great too, because again, teachers in schools are restricted by the number of hours in the day. And so if your child has dyslexia, they're probably going to need extra time to practice, and you as the parent are the perfect person to give it to them. Okay, so that was a little bit of background about dyslexia. So now we're going to move on to area number 2, which was skills to teach. Now, when you're teaching a child to read, whether they have dyslexia or not, you're going to do a lot of the same things. So don't feel like if you know how to teach reading, or you're familiar with teaching reading, or you have workbooks and practice activities for teaching reading, don't feel like you can't use those with your dyslexic child. All you need to do is really monitor their progress, make sure you have enough hands-on activities where maybe they're like manipulating magnetic letters and spelling words. Make sure you have enough hands-on practice activities know what skills they need to practice on, give them practice in those skills, give them extra practice in those skills and more time, and you'll be giving your child what they need. So reading instruction for non-dyslexic children is not that different from reading instruction with dyslexic children. It's just a matter of like lots of hands-on activities, more practice time, and also just noticing what works for their particular learning style. Do they like to, learn while they're standing up? Do they like to be moving around while they're learning? Really just pay attention to what works for them. And the beautiful thing about homeschooling is you really have that opportunity to figure out what works for them and then do it. Okay, so back to skills to teach when we're talking about teaching reading. All of this, by the way, follows the science of reading, meaning what the research and even neuroscience says about how reading happens in the brain and how we can best facilitate that process, meaning make it happen for our kids. Getting into these skills, one skill area that you're going to want to make sure that you're teaching is phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness is the understanding of, ability to work with, ability to hear the individual sounds in words, okay? So, for example, the word map is made up of 3 individual sounds. A, p. We can't break it up anymore. Those are the smallest sounds. Now the word shed is also made up of 3 sounds. Sh, e, d. And because you can already read, that might seem counterintuitive because the word shed actually has 4 letters, but it has 3 sounds. Sh, e, d. Now, when kids are learning to read, what their brains are doing is that they're matching letters to sounds. So an awareness of the sounds in words is really important. That's a really important part of the equation. And when a child is young, practicing phonemic awareness is important to do, yes, as they're reading and spelling words, but also by itself. So for example, maybe you're, saying the word flag, and your child has to tap out the sounds. Flag. That's segmenting phonemes, okay? The opposite of that is blending phonemes, putting phonemes together. This is really helpful because kids have to do this when they read words just with letters. So for example, if your child hears the sounds or you say the sounds at, can your child blend them and say hat? So blending and segmenting phonemes are 2 really important skills under that umbrella of phonemic awareness. These are really important in getting a child to read, but also to spell words, okay? So that is definitely one skill area that you're going to want to work on. Now our next skill area is phonics. Phonics is taking those sounds and matching them to letters, right? So for example, the sound can be spelled with the letter M. Learning the letter sounds, the alphabet usually happens first, so typically you want to teach like the primary sound for each letter, and then the short vowel sounds, teach the short vowel sounds first. And after that, then you're going to work on skills called digraphs like SH. The letters SH work together to represent the sound sh. You also have CH like in chat, TH like in thumb, all of those digraphs. And then next you're probably going to want to work on blends. Blends are different from blending. It's confusing, right? But if you think about that word flag that I mentioned, the F and the L are a blend. A blend is just a group of 2 or more consonants that comes right before or right after a vowel. It can come after too, like in the word must. This is a blend. So it's just 2 or more consonants that come before or after a vowel in the word. So you'll teach the letters, consonant short vowels, digraphs, blends, and then after that there's a bunch of skills like long vowels, glued sounds, and if you need a scope and sequence, you can always search one online, but I will include a link for a scope and sequence. Actually, what I'll do is I'll include a link for my free parent guide, and in that free parent guide there's a list of skills so that you can see like what order you should teach these skills. But as you're teaching your child phonics, meaning the relationships between each letter or letter combination and the sounds that they represent, by the way, let me interject something here. The F and the L, it's a blend, but they still have their own sounds. So it's like ag, flag, must. So they still have their own sounds. These are just different phonics skills that I was going through. So anyway, as you're teaching this sequence of phonics skills, which you can grab my free parent guide to get a sequence of those skills, you will want your child to read words with that skill and spell words with that skill. And you'll want to be so focused. So like if you're working on consonant digraphs like CH, SH, TH, you're not going to want to have your child work on long vowels because long vowels come later. It's not something that they have learned. So you want to make sure that you're using a program or you're choosing words that are limited to only the phonics skills that they have been taught. If you use Rising Readers, our comprehensive program with lots of support for struggling readers and their parents, then you will have that all done for you. I'll include a link to Rising Readers in the caption for this video, but just something to think about as you're having them read and spell words with different phonics skills. You kind of want to move up. It's almost like a staircase, right? Of skills where like the alphabet is here and then they learn digraphs and blends and then maybe they learn like silent E words, some long vowels. And you don't, if they're down here, if your kid is down here on the staircase, then you don't want to be working with skills that are all the way up here because they just haven't learned it yet. So having a really good program like Rising Readers will, like you won't even have to think about it when you use something like that. But I just wanted to throw that out there because that is an important consideration when you're teaching your child phonics. Okay, so the next area that I want to talk about is, and again, these are all reading skills that you're going to want to work on. The next area you're going to want to talk about is, or think about, is fluency. So reading fluency is actually, it's the ability to read accurately at a good speed with expression, and reading practice helps build that, right? Especially reading a text more than once, because the more times a child reads a text, the more fluent they become. The easier it is for them to read, usually the faster they can read it. Typically they're more accurate. So rereading texts really helps build fluency. Another thing that helps build fluency is learning high frequency words. You might also hear these called sight words. And these are really simple, basic words like and, of, is, and they're called high frequency words because they appear frequently in text. They appear often in text. And you can look up a list like the Fry list or the Dolch list, and that will have a bunch of words that you can practice with them. I actually have a video on my channel about teaching your child high frequency words or sight words. What you don't want to do is you don't just want to put them on flashcards and have them memorize these words. In that video, I go over this like brain-based process that really helps kids remember high frequency words so that they can read them quickly and easily and build that reading fluency. So definitely look for that video on sight words on my channel if that's something that you want to learn more about. Again, we don't just want to do flashcards. Flashcards are fine, but first you want to use my process. It's not my process, it's based on brain research, but use the process that I teach you in that video so that your child is actually absorbing these words and they're retaining them, okay? Just doing flashcards when you're introducing a word is not quite enough. All right, so we talked about phonemic awareness, we talked about phonics, we talked about fluency. And again, fluency is kind of like the product of being able to read accurately. So when you're practicing phonics, you're practicing reading, you're practicing high frequency words, that all helps build fluency. And next I'm going to talk about comprehension. So comprehension is just the ability to understand a text. And your child not only needs to be able to like retell details from the text, like actually recall the text, but also to make inferences about a text. And when I say make an inference, I mean, you know, like maybe the character, for example, is stomping around. And so the author doesn't tell us the character felt mad, but your child has to infer, draw that conclusion that, oh, based upon the way this character is acting and what they're saying, they feel mad. So that's a very basic example, but inferring is all about being able to read between the lines. So we work on making inferences in Rising Readers. After our kids read one of the texts, then what we have them do, or what we have the parent do, is ask them a couple of questions that are like just basic retelling, but then we also have you ask questions that are more like inferential, meaning they're digging a little bit deeper and challenging your child's thinking. When you're teaching comprehension skills to a child with dyslexia, often they're going to be very good at answering these questions, but they may be a lot better at answering those questions about books that you read to them. So make sure, in addition to having them practice reading books, Make sure you are reading more challenging texts with lots of great vocabulary words and just, interesting ideas. Make sure you're reading fiction and nonfiction texts to them, especially for a kiddo with dyslexia. They need to have that comprehension development, but if they're struggling or if it's taking them a while to get to the point where they can read more challenging books, yes, practice when they're reading books, but that comprehension instruction really needs to happen when you're reading to them or even when you're giving them audio books. Another really important aspect of comprehension instruction is vocabulary. So you want to be teaching them what words mean. And when you're reading them a book aloud and there's a word that you think they're not going to know the definition of, when you get to that word, tell them the definition quickly and then move on. Keep reading the book. Keep the focus on understanding the text as a whole. And then after the book, maybe you write out, like 4 or 5 words that were new to them. And, maybe you have them draw a picture for each word. Maybe you have a vocabulary journal where it's just a notebook that they keep adding on words that they're learning. Maybe they write a quick definition and they draw a picture, and then, a couple of days later you come back or even the next day you come back and you review what those words mean. You ask them questions, right? For example, let's say you're working on the word gigantic, and you might say, let's say they really love ice cream. Would you like a gigantic dish of ice cream or would you like a tiny dish of ice cream? And just ask them questions to get them using those words. See if you can use them in your real life. One of the great things about homeschooling is that, you're at home with them and you're able to see what they're learning about. So those words that you're putting in their vocabulary journal, see how you can connect them to other experiences when you're out in the community, when you're out in the yard, and really, help reinforce the words. Because when you're teaching vocabulary, it's not enough to just tell them what it is and write it in their journal. You need to revisit it. You need to play games. You need to continue to review those words so that they gain a deep understanding of what they mean and so that they can eventually use them in their own speech and writing. So vocabulary, super important to comprehension. Another thing that's super important to comprehension is background knowledge. So there have been some studies that have been shown that when a child reads a text on a topic that they know something about already, they actually understand the text better than if they don't know anything about the topic, which is pretty interesting, right? But it also makes sense. If you know about a topic, it's going to be easier to add on to your knowledge and really understand what the author is saying, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. And the way that you build background knowledge is just by getting kids to learn about stuff. And whether that's showing them little, instructional videos, and you're reading, again, coming back to comprehension, you're reading lots of books to them. Maybe you choose to read 3 books about frogs to deepen their knowledge of frogs. It's always a good idea to structure things in themes. Whatever you can do to build that background knowledge is going to help them with their comprehension. And, if your child is struggling with reading, you might think all of our time in homeschool needs to be focused on reading. But no, you need to do that science, that social studies work too, because that will help build their background knowledge, okay? And again, reading to them really helps with this. So those are some big areas that have to do with reading. And now we're going to get into some areas that, yes, are related to reading and will help with reading, but also have to do with writing. One of those areas helps with writing, but also helps with reading is oral language development. So you probably do this already, but ask your child questions, ask them what they notice about things in the world, get them talking. When you read them a book or when they read a book, get them talking about what did they think about it? What was the problem in the story? What was the solution? Just getting them using language as much as possible. Super important. And now kind of moving into the writing area, there's some different things that go into writing instruction, and 3 of those things are handwriting. Well, I'm going to actually say there's many things that go into writing ability, but handwriting and also content, ideas, and then also grammar, but we cannot forget the ability to spell words, right? Because spelling is important. We actually need to work on all of these things when we're teaching writing. I know that copy work where kids are just literally copying things over is really big in homeschool, and that can help develop handwriting, which is really good. We just want to make sure that we're not forgetting about these other areas. And when we talk about spelling, this really relates back to phonics and even the phonemic awareness skill of being able to segment words, because phonics knowledge will help develop their spelling. But let's talk about these three. So handwriting, teaching them how to physically form the letters. I know that in our modern world, like, people are texting and we're typing on the computer, but there's a lot of research that shows that handwriting actually helps with kids reading, especially kids with learning disabilities like dyslexia. So we definitely want to make sure to teach them how to form the letters. And this doesn't have to be all paper and pencil, right? Some of it can be, some of it should be. But some of it, maybe you give them colored sand and they're tracing letters in the sand, practicing how to form it. Or maybe you take shaving cream and spread it out over the table and they get to trace letters in the shaving cream. And your table gets cleaned in the process, right? So there's tons of fun ways to practice handwriting. It doesn't have to be all paper and pencil, but that is going to contribute to their writing ability. Another thing is just the content. So ideas, like, what are they writing about? Do they know how to organize their ideas? Obviously, they have to be taught all of this, but we don't want to be so focused on handwriting, spelling, and even grammar that we forget about content, organization, using transition words, like how to, structure a paragraph, how to write an introduction, all of these skills. And then the next thing I want to talk about is grammar. So grammar is, you might think of it as sentence drills and boring worksheets, and there's some basic, more dry parts of grammar that we have to learn, but the whole point of grammar is to write correctly. So when you're working on grammar, yes, maybe do some of those worksheet type things, but also link it to their writing as much as possible. So if you're practicing nouns, and they've written a story, say, okay, I want you to find 5 nouns in the story that you wrote. Or if you're practicing correct capitalization, have them, after you teach them a skill, have them go back to a piece of writing that they've already been working on and have them practice that skill in their writing. So yes, you can kind of do grammar by itself, but also make sure that you're always tying it back to writing, because that's the whole point of having correct grammar. Okay, so it's not just about the drills and the sentence fixing and things like that. It's actually about connecting it to their real writing. All right, so we have talked about a lot of different skills. I hope this kind of gave you a good overview. So this is area number 2, and then we have one more area that we're going to talk about. And this third area is tips and strategies for motivating your child. When your child has dyslexia, reading might be hard. They might get frustrated. They might shut down. These things happen, and it makes sense too, right? If you're an adult who is, you're trying to learn how to play basketball, and you're just really bad at it and you can't seem to get better, that is sometimes how kids with dyslexia feel. They feel like, I'm working so hard, why can I not learn to read? It can be very frustrating for them. And so if something is frustrating, they're going to try to avoid it, right? They're not going to want to read, they're not going to want to practice. But of course, we as the adults know that they need to practice. So let's talk about how to support them and what we can do to set them up for success in, a homeschooling environment, or even if you're just giving your child extra help after school. So one thing that you can do is to write out a schedule for them. It can be really helpful for them to see okay, these are the things I have to do. And then they can also check them off after they complete them. What's really interesting is that there's brain research that shows that checking something off a list actually releases dopamine in our brains, which is that kind of feel-good chemical, and it also creates motivation. So just checking something off a list can actually create motivation for them to keep going. Very simple, but very cool, right? Now, if you're a homeschooling family, you might have a routine. And so you could laminate that schedule. So it's, if it's the same every day, or you do rotating A days, B days, you can reuse it and save yourself some time. But having a schedule, super helpful. Another thing to think about as you're planning your schedule is to intentionally plan for breaks. If reading is hard for your child, if school in general is hard for your child, make sure that you're planning ahead. Think about realistically, how long can they focus? And then just plan ahead for when they need to, go outside, do something different. Think about the subjects that they enjoy too. And, you can kind of sprinkle in the more challenging subjects amongst the more enjoyable subjects. So just think about what what their needs are, and those needs will change as time goes on, and plan for breaks. Now, if you're in the middle of something and it's just not going well, don't feel like you have to finish it. It is okay to take a break, and if you're homeschooling, you have that luxury, right? Classroom teachers, we don't necessarily have that luxury. We have to keep going even if one child is, off task or distracted. We try to help them, but as a homeschooling parent, you can stop what you're doing and give them a break so that you can then get back on track. Okay, so schedule, breaks, choices. Giving your child choices is really helpful too. So maybe there's like 2 things in your schedule and they get to decide what you do first. Maybe they're writing words and they get to decide if they use a pen or a pencil or a marker, like the actual material. Maybe they get to decide what they do for their break or what book they read today. So however you can give them choices, that helps them feel like they're in control. And all human beings, we want to be in control. We don't want to feel like things are happening to us and our circumstances are totally, just like we're just like at the mercy of the world and what is happening. And kids often feel like they don't have control because they're children and they can't have a lot of control. So any ways that you can give them back that control, the better. I know some students that I work with, they really like to play school. So they actually get to teach me sometimes as a break. Your child might like to experience that, experimenting with a little bit of control. And just generally speaking, think about how you can put them in the driver's seat. Coming back to that idea of control. You be the coach, right? You be there like guiding them, giving them praise, but let them do the work. This is true when they're reading, right? If they're struggling with a word, don't just jump in and immediately try to help them. Sit back, see what they can do. Try to give them that power because then they feel like, oh yeah, I can do this. I don't need mom or dad or whoever to jump in and do the work for me. If you jump in and are always helping them immediately, that's teaching them, I can't do this. I need mom or dad or whoever to do it for me. Okay, so just something to think about. The more you can act as their coach without doing the work for them, the better. All right, we covered a lot in this video. I hope that this was helpful. Now, in the caption of this video, I'm going to leave you a free guide so you can find out what phonics skills your child needs to work on. We talked about that way back earlier in the video. And then I'm also going to leave a link to Rising Readers. This is a program that is perfect for struggling readers. So many programs are just made for kids who are average readers, but Rising Readers is designed specifically for kids who are struggling. We have multiple homeschooling parents in the program. We support them. You get videos to show you exactly what to do, exactly how to teach reading. There's videos that teach your child skills for you. All the materials you need. It is just such a huge relief to have the stuff and also have support from me and my team. So I'd love to have you in the program. Check out the caption for this video for the free parent guide and then also the link for Rising Readers. And I hope this was helpful. So let me know if you have any questions. And before you leave, hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe.